Let's get started with our off the shelf for this month. Serve first, lead always, a servant leadership advantage. It probably goes without saying that we're going to be talking about a really, really broad topic, servant leadership. We're going to try and narrow it down in order to make it useful for us. Reminder, we are recording this. You kind of tacitly agree to that by joining. But the reason that that's important, that's me, that's not important, is we've got archived off the shelves, right? And one that's coming up next month that I want to remind you of, and I want you to get this on your calendars now so that you can join. JJ Acker talking about balancing empathy and accountability. I'm not sure I can think of something more useful than that we struggle with as managers, right? Being empathetic while also meeting the standards and targets that we have for our employees. So make sure you get it September 24th, 10 a.m., last Wednesday of the month. JJ Acker, in a very practical sense, will lead us through that. I won't read the whole definition there for you. Now, I'm going to keep flying through this, okay? Flying through our slides. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is where all of the archived off the shelves are. We get a lot of times where people will say, hey, do you guys have any topics or any trainings that cover this topic? And it's like, yeah, we got 3 of them in off the shelf if you want to just go and look. So please subscribe to that YouTube channel so you can have access to all of those. But there's something else that I'm really excited to announce now. I don't have a ton of details, even though it's just right around the corner. One of the most common requests that we get, so an off the shelf is about 45 minutes to an hour long where we cover topics really broadly. We are launching September 1st a new offering. We're not getting rid of off the shelf, okay, but a new offering called Fast Track, which is short for Fast Track to Leadership. These are going to be micro learnings, micro trainings, a few minutes that'll cover really practical things. That'll say like, oh, here's, in 3 minutes, here's how you have a difficult conversation. In 3 minutes, here's how you lead a change initiative, right? In 5 minutes, here's how you set realistic goals with people, right? Things like that. So this is just going to be another thing that we're offering you. Now, the library is not huge yet. It's going to get launched September 1st, but that library of things that we make available to you is just going to grow. Okay, so that's going to be Fast Track to Leadership. You're going to access that the same way you access archived videos, and we're going to also make it available on the Gateway. Okay, now I'm still doing housekeeping things. I apologize about that. So let's get started. Again, I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm going to invite you to read this, but this is what we're going to talk about. This idea of servant leadership and how it contrasts with traditional models of leadership and how you and I can become more servant oriented. And when we do, what is the impact of that? All right. Now, one more quick reminder. As I was preparing this webinar today, I thought, we kind of touch on some other topics here. These are other off-the-shelf offerings that we have given. Outward Mindset from Lance Olson, our good friend. Humility recently. Team Building that Tara did very recently, and Getting Along with Others. There are probably more, but those are just a quick look. If you wanted to, these topics will orbit around servant leadership. So if you're interested in getting more, go check these out. These other off-the-shelf offerings that we've had. Okay, now what I think are staggering numbers I'm going to throw your way. 2019, this number's not really changed, by the way. 2019, Forbes reported that across the globe, $366 billion is spent on leadership development. $366 billion. Okay, $166 billion of that in the U.S. alone. Now, in spite of that, Chief Learning Officer Magazine, okay, surveyed 500 executives. 11% said that their training, their leadership development efforts actually led to desired results. That's a terrible return on investment, right? 11%, okay? Now look at this from Harvard Business Review. 56% of people report that their boss is mildly to highly toxic. That is a massive amount of people with really crappy bosses, okay? And normally what I do, if this was a live training, I would say, okay, now raise your hand right now if you've ever had a really crappy boss, okay? So you can go ahead and give a thumbs up if you would, if you've ever had a really crappy boss. Then I'd go to my stock joke and I'd say, now, if they're in the room, raise your hand again and ha ha ha, that kind of thing, because no one's ever going to do that, right? But almost all of us have had really crappy bosses. It's really kind of discouraging. And then right now, the most recent numbers from Gallup, 69% of employees who are either not engaged, just doing the bare minimum, or actively disengaged, right? Or actively disengaged, who are working against the team, who are working against the organization. These are incredible numbers. My question to you, and one that we brought up before, is why is it that leadership development, $366 billion worth, tends to be so ineffective? Think about that for a second. Now, you don't have to respond. You can put it in the chat if you want, but why is it that our leadership development efforts seem to be so ineffective? I want to pose one thing to you. I recently got some feedback about Off the Shelf, which is not, it was not inaccurate. Someone said to me, hey, we really like Off the Shelf. I think it's really good, but it really tends to be, the word they use was esoteric. I think our supervisors would rather you just give them something practical and useful to use. That's not inaccurate necessarily, but let me tell you this: if you're looking for a more just step-by-step how to do something, this is not going to be the webinar for you. Okay. The reason this is an hour-long discussion on big topics, and we'll get to the practical steps. But really, this is what I think the biggest failing in leadership development is. Most leadership development is focused on the first step there, knowing. Here are the concepts you need to know. Great. Knowing those is better than not knowing. Okay. But the next best thing is doing. And this is what really practical things do. They tell you, okay, now go and do these steps and you'll be a better boss. You'll be a better manager. You'll be a better leader. That's better than just knowing. This is where leadership development falls short. And this is why I, in particular, I know I have a problem with this. I like to have discussions with leaders like you in a much more holistic, almost existential sense, identity sense, because the number one thing you can do to become a better leader is not just know something or do something, but to actually be different, to change your mindset, to start working on changing your DNA. Because when you know stuff and you do stuff, but your intention behind it is not good, or it's not part of who you are, people see through that. So I can go to a training on leadership development and hear some really cool stuff. I don't actually care about the organization. If I don't actually care about my employees, they're going to see through that. It's going to feel inauthentic and hollow, and we're going to keep getting the numbers I showed you previously. Okay. Now, we hear you about having things that are more practical. We'll give you some practical steps here today, but also in the information age, I want you to go after this training. I would love it if you all went to either AI like Gemini or use Chat GPT on your own, right? Or Google and just said, how do I become a better servant leader? Or start reading about servant leadership. Okay. So remember this: know, do, be. We want you to be different in terms of servant leadership. Okay. Now I'm going to do something I don't normally do, but I'm going to try and just stand for like 30 seconds of silence here. And I want you to think about something for a second. This is an activity we've done lots of time with live classes. I want you to think about an experience in which you felt you were influenced positively by a great leader. Just think about that for a second. Who was the person? What were the circumstances? What kind of job was it? Something else. And what happened within you as a result of those experiences? Okay, I'm literally going to go quiet here, if I can make it, for like 30 seconds as you think about that. Okay, I'd like to give you more time, even, but we've got a lot to get to. Now, almost always when we ask this question, in fact, let me change the way I say that. I would say almost never, and maybe never, when we ask that question, do participants in our trainings say, oh, this person was really charismatic and they were really good at building themselves up. Almost without exception, when people think about a time when they were positively influenced by a leader, and they describe the context and who the leader was, this leader was helping them become better, right? What they really end up describing, even if they don't know they're describing it, is a servant leader. Now, the person that I had as a boss, longer than I've had any other boss in my 19 years with the state of Utah, I don't know if he would even describe himself as a servant leader, but the thing I remember more than any other, I had been with him for about a year, and we had developed a new training on goal setting and performance management. This was back in 2009, okay? Now, I'd never trained on this before, and we were kind of launching this new program. And it was like a Tuesday after Memorial Day. And our training was going to be held at the Cannon building, the health building, right? And I got into the room that morning, and over the weekend, I don't know how this happened, but over the weekend, there had been a leak in the room. It had been really rainy, and someone had left, without the trash going out, there was a dirty diaper in the trash in that room all weekend. Now, my boss didn't tell me he was going to do this. I didn't ask him to do this. That was fine. I could set up the room by myself or whatever, but he knew it was my first time training on this. He got there even a couple minutes before I did, and he had already immediately started. He took the trash out. He went and grabbed the janitorial staff who started, trying to get the clean up where it had been leaking, and started spraying the room so it would smell better, that sort of thing, which never entirely works, right? It just kind of smells like deodorant on BO. But anyway, spraying the room and getting that taken care of. Started arranging them. Was like, Dan, you just focus on your presentation. That still, of all my memories with this boss, that is the thing I remember more than any other. He did not have to do that. And by the way, he wasn't there. He didn't stick around to watch me train. He wasn't like, I was going to be there anyway because I had to rate you in this. He just came, he did that, made sure I was good, and then went to the office. That is such an example to me of servant leadership, and the fact that I remember it still to this day, right? So when you think about the kind of leader you want to be and the leadership experiences you've had, almost always something you deemed as meaningful happened between you because of your association with that leader. Maybe you grew, maybe you guys accomplished something important together, but almost always when we report a positive experience where we're positively influenced by a leader, it's this esteem was built between you and the leader. They made you see yourself as better than you were. They served you, right? And you felt like you were better off for having had that experience. This is what we're talking about when we say servant leadership. Now, there is an actual model. There are many models to servant leadership, but this is an actual theory framework in the leadership literature, right? So let's first talk about where this comes from. Late 60s, early 70s, this concept of servant leadership, although if you read lots of different religious texts, religions all across the world, this idea of servant leadership comes across. But in the business world, this was revolutionary, right? Robert Greenleaf, who had been a high-level executive at AT&T, was reading a book once by Herman Hesse called Journey to the East. And it was about these people going on this mythical journey that was crazy. And he realized that the real leader of this group going on this mythical journey was the lowly person in the group named Leo, who is actually the person keeping their spirits up, carrying their stuff, making sure that people remain positive. He was a servant. And so he was really inspired by this. Robert Greenleaf was, he says, that's leadership. Okay. And so he really started this whole revolution of servant leadership. And now, of course, it's been operationalized into organizational context today, but I love this from Robert Greenleaf. The servant leader is servant first. It begins with a natural feeling that one wants to serve. Serve first, right? Rather than I want a position. I want power. I want the raise, right? rather than influence and that sort of thing. It's like, how can I help others? How can I help this cause? And when we do that, when we are servant first, we naturally lead effectively. Okay. Now, here's the model that has been operationalized. This is from from Administrative Sciences in 2017. These are the characteristics and competencies and the outcomes. Now, you don't have to read all of this, okay? But of course, in an academic journal and in research, you're going to get some hefty stuff. I just want you to see that this comes from somewhere. We're not just saying, oh, isn't it nice and fluffy to think about helping others and that sort of thing. The bottom line, if you look at outcomes, is massively impacted when you and I develop these characteristics and these competencies, okay? I want to make that argument to you. Now, let me show you a little bit more closely. Today, what we're going to talk about in particular is humility, compassion, altruism, and listening, with a heavy, heavy emphasis on altruism, right? Now, if you look at these characteristics and competencies, we have many off the shelves, if that's the appropriate plural of that. We have many offerings that cover these topics. But for you and I today, I want you to understand that we're going to be spending a lot of time on listening, altruism, compassion, and things like that. But I want you to look at this one more time, because there are some people on this meet right now or streaming this or who will watch it later who are saying, this is fluffy stuff. And I get that, right? It's certainly idealistic and it's optimistic, right? But this is what the evidence, the science behind what I just showed you. When you have these things, these characteristics right here, you get these outcomes: less burnout, less turnover and tension, higher work engagement, right? Better self-efficacy, more trust, yada, yada. At the team and organizational level, you can read all this: better customer service, better sales performance, right? Everyone is a better colleague, more citizenship behaviors. The bottom line is impacted positively. So this is the model we want to work from today. Okay, now you need to be asking yourself, am I a servant leader? And one of the questions I want you to think about, this is from, by the way, I forgot to label this, but this is from Robert Greenleaf. This is from his original writings on servant leadership. He said this is the best test, but it's hard to administer. It's not the kind of like an assessment you can administer very easily. He says, do those serve grow as persons? Think about your employees right now, or those that you work around if you're not currently a manager. Do they grow because of their association with you? Do they become healthier, wiser, freer, and I love this, more autonomous because of their association with you? And do they become servants because of their association with you? This is a big ask of you and I as leaders. And this is really kind of a penetrating question here. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you another, again, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to think about this. Imagine we were in a classroom together right now. This is from an actual assessment that is used. It's been validated. It is not all the questions, but it's some of them. If you have a piece of paper, write this down. If you want to just do it online, or if you want to do it mentally, I'd love for you to stop what you're doing though. If you're looking at another screen, if you're in another meeting right now and you just have this going on in the background, as I know some of us do, what I'd like you to do is really answer these questions right now for yourself. Do I put others' interests ahead of my own? Not at all, to frequently. You see the scale there. I do everything, and I'm going to read these as you do these for those that it's helpful to. I do everything I can to serve others. I sacrifice my own interests to meet others' needs. And in this case, I'd like you to think about either your employees, if you're a manager, or your colleagues, if you're not currently a manager, if you're a future manager, future supervisor. I go above and beyond the call of duty, not the video game. Okay, I go above and beyond the call of duty to meet others' needs. I make decisions with others' best interests in mind. I am someone to whom others will turn if they have personal trauma. I'm good at helping others with their emotional issues. And I am intentional about helping others grow and develop. The interesting thing is, as you do this, let me keep talking. I know that's a little distracting. As you do this, I want you to know this assessment has two sets of questions. This one is for you to answer. The other one is given to your employees or those you choose. And the questions are, does this person put others' interests ahead of their own? Does Stephanie, does Spencer, does Karan, does Normalani, do they care? Do they do everything they can to serve others? Right? Think about that. If we were to give this to those that you work with, those that you are serving right now, how would you do? If I'm going to be very honest, what I tend to pick things for off the shelf that I want to work on, that I need to get better at. The truth is, I am very self-absorbed. And very insecure, which can also hinder servant leadership, which we'll talk about here in a second. My hunch is there's some of you on this call or on this meet, some of you who are streaming this, that have a lot of 3s and 4s. And then some of you are more like me with a lot of 1s and 2s, right? But this gives you a sense of the mindset, the no, do, the be, where you and I would have to make some adjustments. Okay? Now,
can I ask a quick question, Dan?
Go ahead.
So I'm learning to start to put myself first sometimes and like set boundaries and take care of myself in a healthier way versus being on the extreme other end of that and serving everyone else before me. So how do you know, score wise with that last slide, like if you've found the right balance?
The score is not going to tell you the balance. So it's a good question. There are going to be other symptoms that are going to tell you if you have the right balance, including the very trite phrase, Annie, all you can do is all you can do. And so you'll see here in a second, as we get to the enemies of altruism, to make sure that you're not, because there are those that serve to the extent that it becomes unhealthy. And when it becomes unhealthy for you as a leader, it starts to become unhealthy for those that you're serving. And
right.
That would be the first symptom, I think, that it's out of balance. So let me go through some of these and tell me if we orbit an answer around that. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks.
Okay, good question. So I've told you we're going to talk a lot about altruism here. Okay. I asked Sadie, who I forgot to thank at the beginning of this, Sadie Rawlinson, who's on our team, who helps me with the slides, and she has to help me more than she helps anybody else on the team, by the way, if we're being totally honest. I asked her to find something. I explained to her the concept I wanted, and she found this for me, and I think it's perfect. 19 years, you guys, I've been doing leadership development in one form or another at the state of Utah as well as other places. I think if we were to summarize the number one thing, the reason I showed you those numbers before and why there's such a terrible return on investment with leadership development and why we still struggle with this in spite of all we know about effective leadership. The number one thing is that leadership, we are all, even if you don't have a leadership position, we tend to have some degree, to one degree or another, self-centeredness. We are self-consumed to one degree or another, right? Me more than others, some of you less than me, of course, right? Leadership positions tend to exacerbate this. The number one thing that hurts your leadership effectiveness is self-absorption. Or what I'm going to tell you now is, and we're going to introduce you to a new term called solipsism. This idea of only I am the most important thing that matters in this universe and everything else orbits around me. And the problem is very often you don't, and I don't even know that we're doing that. But most leaders, if I go to a conference to become a more effective leader, the unintentional consequences, I think about myself for like 3 days straight. And the number one thing that you could do is to say, how can I think of others before I think of myself? In fact, I've seen leaders, well-intentioned leaders, start treating their time as if it's more important than others, right? And whether it's because of egocentrism or arrogance or insecurity, almost everything becomes about me. How do I prove that I'm an awesome leader? And the second that happens, when we become the center of everything, our leadership is diminished. Okay, our leadership is diminished. So I want you to remember this imagery, right? So these are going to be our enemies to altruism or that form of servant leadership. I'm going to try and go through these quickly, but this might be, and this is the world according to Dan, okay? In my experience with working with and coaching and training and consulting with leaders in all various shapes and sizes, I have seen that these are how these enemies to altruism, these things that kind of keep us from being servant leaders, this is how they tend to manifest themselves in 3 broad categories. They're not entirely distinctive, and there's some clear overlap here. Stay with me though. The first is, and you know this, and some of you who raise your hand said, I've had a crappy boss before. This tends to be the reason. It's blatant narcissism. In other words, and by the way, I don't think this is the majority of the leadership population. I think most people are not this way, but so let's say like 10%. I don't know. But blatant narcissism is I'm better, I'm more important than you. And that's why I'm the boss. Let me share with you a quick example of this. Someone I appreciate the vulnerability, share this with me. I'm going to try and do what I can to mask their identity, right? To be fair to them. And I want you to know that when this person shared this, it was an aha moment for them. They said, something was revealed to me, and now I know to move on from that. So this is not a knock on this person. They deserve a lot of credit. When someone shared with them, they have a lot of satellite offices, right? They went out to one of the offices, and their subordinate who runs this office reminded them and said, do you know what happened 3 years ago? And he said, no, I don't. He said, I told you, hey, you need to come out here more. And this leader's response was, okay, well then who's going to do my job? That was the response. Now here he was 3 years later, having grown as a leader, being so chagrined at that answer, saying, oh yeah, well then who's going to do my job? In other words, I can't come out here and just kind of dork around with you peons because I got to be up at the main office doing my job. Now, that isn't to say that he didn't have administrative duties and things he has to take care of, but think how narcissistic potentially that answer comes across as, and how much growth this leader has to say, man, I would never answer that way today. And in fact, he was out there at this satellite office and taking time, spending all day out there, quite frankly. But that's a good example, I think, of this blatant narcissism. Have you ever had a leader that takes credit for what the team does or for what you do? These are some ways it manifests itself. A lot of times these narcissists are focused, their whole thing is, how do I look good for my next promotion? How do I look good to the boss? Not how do I help my team grow? How do I serve them? How do I help us all succeed? How do I get the next promotion, right? Very often these blatant narcissists will use I language and, oh, my efforts. I did this rather than we and our. That plural, those plural possessive pronouns, right? They'll use, oh, I and, or even, and I do this as well, I try not to, my team. My team is working on, oh, that doesn't come across, that doesn't sound good to people, right? Especially, interestingly enough, especially if you're the boss, right? Especially if you're the boss, it doesn't sound good to say, oh yeah, my team, like the people below me, right? And quite frankly, a lot of times they will, in decision making and when there's idea generation, they're going to go with their idea or not even let others have a voice because they're like, why would I? I'm the most talented. I'm the smartest. So we're going to go with my idea. Okay. Again, I don't know that there's a majority. And by the way, if you know other examples of how blatant narcissists act, put them in the chat for other people to read. I probably can't get to it, but put it in there if you're like, here are some other examples, right? Brenda, I see your comment, and for sure you're right. If we're saying it the right way, right? I agree with you 100%, Brenda. Especially if we're not the boss, it's context specific, and we can chat about that more in a second. But you're not wrong, okay? So other examples of blatant narcissism that you see, okay? Now this one, which is really interesting, our second category is pathological altruism. Oh, Becky, that's dang good. I happen to see her comment, but look at Becky's comment. That's really good too. Pathological altruism, Annie, is potentially where we run into some of the issues that you brought up. The parallel, I think, which is always risky to make, would be almost like a helicopter parent who does everything for their kids, never lets them breathe because they're such a good parent, where they actually stunt the child's development, right? That would be a form of pathological altruism. How does that manifest itself in the workplace? Let me give you a weird example here. So this is, I'm gonna point out some people to you. I think you can see 5 of our team went to a coaching certification at Harvard. Okay, now we were stoked to get to go to Harvard. I'm not going to tell you that it was not the greatest experience ever, but it wasn't. There's me and JJ. I don't know what I'm looking at, by the way. There's Sydney, Rick, and Tara right there. We had this experience. I'm going to try and do this quickly. There was a guy, I'll just tell you, even though this is going to be public, right there on the bottom right. His name was Greg. It became very clear early on. Greg volunteered. The person who ran this coaching certification asked for someone to be coached. And Greg got up there, and immediately it was obvious Greg was really not interested in being coached as much as he was interested in telling everyone how awesome he was. Now, here's what's interesting. His problem was his boss asked him to do something that would require time from his subordinates, and he didn't have the time to do it, and he didn't really want to do it. Now, that's a generalization, but as he was talking and everyone's giving him advice, one of his employees that was there was like, Greg, no, you need to delegate more, right? You need to delegate more. And you're such a servant leader, Greg, that you need to let others. And I immediately was like, nope, actually, he's not being a servant leader. Greg is interested in Greg. And in fact, his answer was, instead of like just having his employees who are more than capable, which this employee indicated, his response is, no, they shouldn't have to do it. I get up at 4 a.m. to do my ice plunge and lift weights and read my Bible. He's like, I'll just get up a half an hour earlier each day at 3:30. And I think the response he wanted from the room was, oh, this guy's incredible. Okay. This is, his people are being stunted. Now, even though she called it, it was a misnomer. His employee called it, oh, you're such a servant leader. Is Greg actually serving his employees, or is it about Greg? In this case, it was clear to everyone that this is pathological altruism. He is trying to help them. Yes. And by the way, Eric, one of the key signs of pathological altruism is codependency. Okay. Is codependency. You hit the nail on the head, right? So this is people that are like, hey, I'm going to lift the most and carry the most and do the most, not because I'm actually trying to help you, team, and because I'm putting you first, but because of my ego and my identity that I'm such an awesome leader, even a servant leader, that I have to be the one to say that I'm doing the most. Okay? That is not actual servant leadership, because really, where is the focus on? The world is still orbiting around you. Okay? This can lead to burnout. The biggest problem is, of course, this is not really sustainable. And ultimately people sense that it's about you and not about them. You are depriving people of growth opportunities. Okay. And in the long term, it can create this disconnect or even animosity from people. Okay. And so pathological altruism, again, we see it a lot in parents, but we're seeing it more and more in the workplace. The test is always, are people growing? And am I really motivated just to help me? Okay. Now, I've got one more to get to, our third category here. And I think this is the most difficult. This is when we have masked motivations. The narcissist doesn't have masked motivations. They'll just lie to you about what their motivations are. They won't tell you, oh, I'm doing this so I look good. They'll say, no, it's for the team, blah, 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 but it's for them. Mass motivations, very often, the blatant narcissists, their motivations are purely because they think they're better and they deserve it. Masked motivations are more complex because it doesn't come from a place of arrogance and narcissism. It comes from a place of insecurity. And you and I can even convince ourselves we're not aware that our real motivations for doing something are not other focused. It's us focused, right? So I'll give you a word example. This is a team photo that we took, I don't know, like a week ago or something. I love this team photo, by the way. I genuinely do. And I don't know if this example is going to land or not. But it's actually going to sound like I'm bragging, but I caught myself doing something really quickly, and I hope I learned something. We took this team photo, and by the way, you need to know, I need to give a shout out. That's Sadie, bottom right there. who did all my slides for today, and I never give her enough credit. And Shane, right above my shoulder there, I'm in the middle. Shane there, who helps us run all this, and then, I don't know, my team is just amazing. Okay, and I'm not just blowing smoke here. My team is like, I love just hanging out with my team. Okay, and working with my team. We did individual photos, and then the photographer, who did a fantastic job, by the way, said, okay, we're going to take a team photo on. She said, we have 9 people. To be fair, she said, do we need someone to be in the center? Like, is there someone like who ought to be there? And I think it was Tara and maybe one other who said, oh, yep, Dan. Dan needs to be in the middle because I'm the director, right? I'm the manager. I'm the boss. And my knee-jerk reaction, was to say, no, guys, no, hey, no, I don't need to be in the middle. And then I realized that was going to really be more about me. My motivation was about me not needing to be the center of attention. And really, the best thing I could do for the team, and just the quickest thing to get this freaking photo taken, was just go in the middle. It's fine. Just go in the middle. And I realized my motivations when I demurred at first was to be like, no, guys, why should I be in the middle? And then for one of the few times in my life, I think because I was prepping for this webinar, I caught myself and said, just go in the middle. Who cares? It's not a big deal, right? 4 of us had to use the bathroom. Let's just get on with this photo shoot, right? So this is what I mean by these motivations that we need to be, these subtle motivations that are sometimes masked, that we need to be on the lookout for. Like I said, this is the most common and the most subtle. Very often, it is insecurity that is driving your behavior. I'm not convinced. I'm worried that people are going to think and ask themselves, why is this person the leader? So I'm going to talk the most. I'm worried that they're not going to think that I'm not that smart. And so I'm going to give all the ideas, and we're going to go with my ideas so I can prove to them that it works. Okay. In fact, this happens. One of a common example of this happening is leaders actually shirking their leader responsibilities, meaning they say, a leader who suffers from this will go, hey, you know what? I'm going to keep doing these things. I'm going to keep doing widget making because I'm such a humble leader, servant leader, that I'm going to keep making widgets, that even though you've been promoted and you have a different role now, you're ignoring these leadership responsibilities. When really, it's because you're kind of scared to do those things, and you were promoted because you were a good widget maker. But you can put it under the guise of, oh no, I'm in the trenches with my team. Does that make sense? This is what I mean by shirking leader responsibilities. Now, I wanted to spend a good chunk of our time talking about imposter syndrome. The next time I do an off the shelf, I think I'm going to cover imposter syndrome, because when I do coaching and other things, I'm almost never worked with a leader where they didn't feel imposter syndrome. Couple things. First, increasingly, I see a lot of thought leaders who are saying, good, if you're feeling imposter syndrome, good. That means you're challenging yourself. You're taking on something big. And I agree with that. But also, I think very often, when we feel imposter syndrome, it's because we misunderstand our role as leaders. We feel like our job is to be the smartest, to have all the answers, to be the most talented. That is not a leader's job, okay? And so one of the best things you can do when we have mass motivations is very often motivated by this feeling of imposter syndrome. The number one thing you can do is reframe and say, my job is to serve these people, and I can control that. Even if I'm not naturally a servant leader, even if I tend to be self-absorbed like I am, that is something I know I can get better at, and I can control my mindset and my actions there. Okay. And we'll talk way more about that in the next off the shelf I do on imposter. I think I want to cover no promises, but I want to cover imposter syndrome. Okay. So just a couple of things here about how this actually works. You've seen this before. This is Maslow. I'm going to go through this quickly. People have now taken Maslow and this highest level of motivation, which is self-actualization, and they've turned it into self-absorption. You've got to just worry about you. Do you. Just be you. Don't worry about other people. What's interesting is what Maslow said back in 1971. I think he died in 71 as well, right? Maslow said people who are moved beyond self-actualization are, and these are his words, are without a single exception involved in a cause outside of their skin, in something outside of themselves. not inward, outward. They were serving others. They were serving a purpose. Okay. And then Neil Chalosky, who's a leadership expert, meaningful work expert, and commenter on Maslow, said Maslow's message was that people must ultimately move from a focus on self to a focus and concern for other people to achieve the highest level of human nature. Don't get sucked into the gravitational pull of your leadership role, of, oh my, whether that's from arrogance or insecurity, right? Oh, I've got to be the smartest, I've got to be the brightest, or oh my gosh, I'm not good enough for this, so I've got to prove to them how good I am, or I must be important because I got this role and no one else did. Or I've got to be ready for my next promotion. Whatever it is, that gravitational pull is so powerful. Remember that servant leaders focus on others, right? So solipsism is this: I'm the only thing in the world that matters. I'm the only thing in the world that exists. Altruism is I care about others. I'm not self-interested, right? The truth is, we as leaders float through various levels of this all the time. We're going back and forth, navigating this as we work on this to become better. And it's, but where we ultimately want to end up, none of us can be entirely selfless, okay? And a typical leader can sometimes do things for others, but this is where we ultimately want to end up, right? Okay, I'm going to keep going quickly here. One of the ways that we make this a reality is something that's called the employee advantage. Now, this is a book that came out, I want to say 2024. Go out and get this book. Okay, the employee advantage. Stephen Meyer, I think he's out of Columbia, right? Professor there, scholar, but it's such a readable book. Okay, the traditional model of leadership for decades and decades now was, I'm the most important. I'll try and help the organization succeed, and employees and customers are there to help me achieve that. Okay, now let me give you the servant leadership model. I'm going to go through this quickly. It's the inverted of that. Now, what I want to tell you is who's on top, who's most important. It's employees, right? The leaders at the bottom, the leaders there genuinely to support those other things. Now, what I want to tell you is that this is easy to comprehend in a model like this, harder to do, right? Because of that gravitational pull of the solipsism of leadership. But I want to show you these two side by side because I want to explain something to you. If you were to go and Google these right now, what you would probably find is we didn't just invert these for the purpose of this webinar. Customers was at the bottom or at the top on servant leadership. What Stephen Meyer and others are arguing now is like, no, employees need to be at the top. Employees need to be your number one resource. And then the customer service, that'll take care of itself. You treat your employees well, then your customers are going to be well taken care of. And Richard Branson, right? Virgin Atlantic, all those companies, if clients don't come first, if you take care of the employees, yeah, they got you, right? He knows this. Okay. Lots of leaders understand this, but organizations still struggle with this, right? It's not about ping pong tables. Now, I love ping pong, and I've worked in a state office that actually had a ping pong table. But if at its core, your culture is not about putting employees first, a ping pong table is not going to solve anything. A free, a day where you bring in pizza, the pizza party, is not going to solve itself. We're talking about a holistic change where employees are first. And this is what the employee advantage, that book I told you about, this is what the research says employees want. They want purpose in their work. They want to do something that matters. They want autonomy. They want to be able to be treated like professionals who say, I know a good way to get this job done. And also, I know the best schedule for me in how to get this done. Okay. They want growth. They want work that's too easy is not interesting to people. They want to do work that excites them. They want to grow in directions that they get to choose, that serve their clients and serves the organization, but that's interesting to them. And they want to be challenged. And of course, they want community. Now, I can tell you right now, I could go through the list of off the shelf and the live trainings that we do, and I'll tell you, this kind of tends to be, we could put all our trainings into one of these buckets. These are the things that people want. If you're going to be a servant leader, start figuring out ways, whatever your role is right now. Even if you feel hamstrung by leaders above you, Start figuring out ways to give your people purpose, autonomy, growth, and community. Okay. And then you are serving the employees. Okay. And so this is, again, Stephen Meyer. I won't read this whole quote to you, but this is what he says. Okay. This is what he says. Whether you're a frontline supervisor or a CEO, you have to, it can't just be ping pong tables. You have to actually be committed to this. Okay. All right, moving along quickly. By the way, Amazon, who is known to be great at customer service, brutal to their employees, has recently adopted this. Okay, think about how this jives with what the Robert Greenleaf quote earlier about, are people growing? Are they empowered, right? Are they ready for what's next? This is what Amazon is. They're not there yet, by the way, but this is what Amazon is striving to work for with their employees. Okay, now, the last model we're going to talk about here, we got to get you out of here. I'm excited to share this with you because I was supposed to share this at another webinar, and this is going to be shocking to you, but I didn't have enough time. I didn't get there. It's Give and Take from Adam Grant, who is probably my favorite leadership theorist out there. Okay, this is his book. Go and get it, read it. Adam Grant is awesome because he's got all this evidence, but he's also an optimist and idealistic, but he backs it up. He's at Princeton right now, okay? And some of you will listen to his podcasts and other things, right? I'm going to give you an example of a giver. This is going to seem like brown nosing. I promise you it's not. We're getting ready to launch SOL, the State of Utah Leadership Certification Program, year 2. And with that comes so much material, okay? So much material that we've got to lift boxes, do everything. Well, one day, one of the people on our team said, hey, all these boxes are here. Anybody able to come in and help me move them? It's just one person. And then a thing came in later that said, hey, don't worry, Greg, not the same Greg from before, by the way, Greg, who works for DHRM, Greg moved them. Greg helped me, and he got others to help too. Greg never said, hey, Dan, moved your boxes today. Greg is my boss, by the way. Moved your boxes today. Greg just did it without any fanfare, he saw that this person needed help, and he went and moved them. Greg is a good example of a servant leader who is always like, hey, Dan, you have to do performance management this way. I created this template for you. This might make it easier to do. Things like that all the time. Without any fanfare, without anything like that. He's just like, yeah, here, let me help you do your job better, Dan. That's simple. That's an example of a giver, okay? So really quickly, there are 3 categories that Adam Grant gives us. Takers. They take more than they give. These are manipulators. These are those narcissists, right? They see the world as dog eat dog, and they're going to try and get as much from people as they can. They're not usually vicious, but they're like, I don't care. I'm going to try and if you get the promotion, I don't. The world's a zero-sum game to them. Okay. Then there are matchers. I think I'm probably a matcher. These are people that like, okay, I'll give as much as I get on the team. I'm not going to sacrifice more than others do on the team. I'm not going to be the one that helps others more than they help me. And I think a lot of us operate at this level implicitly, subconsciously, right? And then right now, think about people you know that are givers. They pay more attention to what others need from them. They just want to be generous with their time, their knowledge, their skills, their ideas, their connections. Hey, let me connect you. Let me network for you. Let me help you with this project you're working on, not with any reciprocation, not with the expectation about a quid pro quo, but just simply like, yeah, I want to help you, right? Raise your hand if you know a giver. You work with a giver or you know a giver in your organization right now. Okay, we got some thumbs up, some hands up. Good. I hope you do. I know a ton of matchers. I'd like to think I'm a matcher. I worry that I'm a taker. Okay. Now, interesting thing. What we want to be more givers, right? That's what servant leaders are. And as leaders, we'd like to be givers. Here's what's interesting. Of these 3, I want you to vote in the chat. Which of these 3, takers, matchers, and givers, does Adam Grant say does the worst professionally? In terms of climbing the corporate ladder, who do you think does the worst? We got a lot of different opinions coming in. Okay, keep them coming. Yeah, who do you think does the worst? You ready? Here's the answer. Unfortunately, it's givers. Research suggests that givers sink to the bottom of the success ladder. That's an indictment on us, right? There's evidence that compared with takers, givers earn 14% less money, have twice the risk of becoming victims of crimes, and are judged as 22% less powerful. That's really disappointing. Now, of takers and matchers, which does the best professionally? Go ahead and vote. Here's what's interesting. It's a trick question because the answer is givers. Givers do the worst professionally, and givers also do the best professionally. Extensive research reveals that people who give their time and knowledge regularly to help their colleagues end up earning more raises and promotions in a wide range of settings. They have built such capital, such credibility with people that they do better. How? How is this so? Adam Grant says, and this is where we step away from the naive a little bit. Adam Grant says, if you look at this XY axis here on concern for self-interest and concern for others, selfish takers, they don't care about others. They just care about themselves. He wants you and I, and he says the people that do best are otherish givers, meaning they focus on giving to people, but they don't do it at the expense of themselves. They do it in a very practical way, not a manipulative way, not a self-serving way, but they're not naive to the organizational politics in which they exist. They're not just like, oh, I will give and sacrifice no matter what. They're aware, okay? And in fact, look for what he says here. Being otherish means being willing to give more than you receive. Others givers help with no strings attached. They're just careful not to overextend themselves along the way. Right? Back to think about Annie's question earlier, right? So there is what the takeaway for you is, can we be givers? Can we be servant leaders without being naive? Without being manipulated? Without being steamrolled? That's where we want to be. And that is absolutely attainable. So how do givers succeed? By consistently overriding their selfish impulses. Remember that gravitational pull. In order to help others, they had strengthened their psychological muscles to a point where using their willpower, right, for painful tasks to get over their selfishness was no longer exhausting. So if we can strengthen this muscle and be a true giver, true servant leader, we get better at this. Okay, we get better at this. So let me conclude with this. Arthur C. Brooks, who the state of Utah has used quite a bit. He's written a book with Oprah now and other things. I'm going to give you a couple things here for those of you like, give me the practical stuff. Well, here it is. You're not going to love this, but you have to treat others with kindness, with altruism, with compassion, right? And I've even been coaching with someone where we had them stop and actually document the qualities and contributions of others that they were trying to serve more. Okay? Demonstrating gratitude to others. I'm trying to do that today because I realize how little I do that for how much Sadie helps me in particular. And then always, when you're struggling with people, you want to get better at this, every situation, what can I learn from this? But there's something else I want you to do. I want you to do this. I want you to regularly check your motives. I want you to regularly say, am I doing this because I'm suffering from imposter syndrome? Am I doing this so I look good? Am I doing this because I feel insecure? Am I doing this because I think I'm smarter or more capable than the rest of the team? Or am I doing it because I think it's going to actually help them grow and it's going to help our team be more effective? It is a painful thing, but absolutely valuable if you will literally set aside time to check your motives. Then you need to remind yourself of your true role as a leader. It is not to be the best, not to be the smartest, not to be the most capable, not to be the most talented. Okay, it's good to be those things, but your role as a leader is to be servant first. Your job is to help others. Your job is to make sure they're succeeding, they are happy, they are better, they are helping the organization meet its goals and meet its needs. Right? And when you do that, watch the imposter syndrome, watch some of the insecurity dissipate. And this is going to sound funny, but I also want you to regularly schedule time to actually just stop and think about those that you serve. This might be meditation. This might be prayer. This might be stopping and literally looking at their pictures on your computer screen. But I want you to actually take the time where you, and I don't mean like, oh yeah, I think about them here or there, but and it happens organically. That's great. I want you to regularly schedule the time and say, am I reflecting on them and how I can better serve them? The truth is, most of us will try and become better servant leaders without actually stopping and taking the time to do that. Okay. Now, the final thing is this. In every servant leadership resource that I've ever looked at, from Robert Greenleaf, who's the godfather of servant leadership, the creator of this concept, to, you know, the Simon Sinek's of today and others who have kind of just taken his work and expanded it, listening has always, always, always been a part of it. Because listening is one of the most, true listening is one of the most selfless and altruistic and most challenging, by the way, things that you and I can do, is to genuinely just listen to others, because we know, listen to understand and listen to learn. That listening is a very sort of symbol of servant leadership if we're doing it the right way. Okay, this is not easy to do, fairly easy to comprehend, much harder. In other words, if we go back to know, do, be, very easy to know. Yeah, none of you are struggling with this intellectually. Doing, and even more important, that being authentic about it, being, much more challenging. Much more challenging. And that's the commitment that you and I need to make today, is regardless of our role, regardless of the culture in which we're currently leading, even if it's not a servant leadership culture, are we willing to be servant leaders? Okay. Remember that gravitational pull of leadership that we all have naturally. We're self-absorbed. You've got to actively fight it. You've got to actively fight it and be like, I am not more important. I am not better. And even, wait, when I'm insecure, I'm still thinking the world revolves around me. Serve those around you, right? So again, your leadership is not about you. Stop focusing on yourself, either negatively or positively. And we can become servant leaders if we are intentional about it. That's really the key, is, are we consciously saying, I'm going to think about them and not think about me? Okay. Just a reminder, sign up for next month's Balancing Empathy and Accountability. It's going to be a fantastic off the shelf. I'm so excited for that. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember, Fast Track is coming. We need you guys to, this is what you've asked for. And so we really want to give you and meet you where you are, give you practical, quick hitting opportunities for management and leadership development. Thank you, everybody. We know that you're busy, so we really appreciate you signing up for these. And it's always just good to spend time with you, right? An important topic. Go up and Google AI servant leadership. Now's the time for you to go do your own work on this, okay? I'll stick around for a bit for questions, answer what I can. But that's it, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.